Hi, it's Mike here. Just wanted to kind of throw a few ideas around about an architecture pattern I've been looking at recently. So here we have a scenario where we've got let's imagine we've got a college, and that college has a lot of data which is generally going to be publicly available without a massive amount of security around the courses and the makeup of different courses that they're going to offer to prospective students. So here we've got, let's call this Acme University, and Acme University are developing a new API to let their applications and their partners and stuff talk into the back end systems that house this course information. So here's a classic example of a hybrid architecture, hybrid API, where if we implemented it with Azure, we might have something like API management, which the consumers of the API would be managed on. Behind the scenes, we might call into a logic app. We might use the data gateway, hybrid connectivity pieces of logic apps to call into on-premise systems and kind of aggregate together the data. So in this case, we might have two different databases that are being updated in tandem, kind of thing, with the course information spread across multiple systems. So if you think about many typical organizations, in an ideal world, you would have all of the master data for a given entity would be in one system, or one database, making it easily accessible. But in the real world, it's not always the case. So here we've got this kind of legacy architecture under the hood, and we want to kind of cloudify and API friendlyify this kind of this pattern. So it gives us a few problems here. So number one, we inherit a load of complexity around these on-prem databases. At the same time, we've got concerns around, well, if we just plug an API into them, are they even going to perform? Will they fall over? Does that affect other stuff? But also, for Acme University, they're going to be doing a migration of these systems at some point to a new platform, which will give them a much better way of managing that master data. So what we've got to remember is that while the API is gonna do a certain amount of real good stuff for the business, under the hood we've got a real transition architecture to deal with here. And I think it's always, especially with distributed systems in the modern day, it's always good to think about things as being in a constant state of transition. It's very rare that we actually get to a complete standstill. Target architecture, things are always moving and changing and going on. So what I was thinking of doing was, while this is on the face of it might seem like a great approach, I've got some concerns about hooking into these databases and also what's going to happen to these, and how do I keep my API kind of working effectively. So based on a recent post that I did around static data in Azure being returned from API management, it had me thinking about some different ways of doing this. So the way I've been sort of toying with of how you might solve this problem is, course data for colleges, etc. It tends not to change very often. So you might have, certain courses, certainly at various points in the year, it might change, a couple of times during the day, something like that, when they're modifying the offer during the points in the year where people might do clearing if you're in the UK, or equivalent processes in the US. But as a general thing, this data is not constantly changing. It's kind of fairly. So what I was thinking about was, well, the first thing is, can we create a data model, and can we decouple the API from the line of business systems? And if we can do that, then that means we can change the way the underlying systems work without really having a big effect on the API. But at the same time, we can also look at ways of making a really high performing API that's not going to have any impact on underlying systems. So what I was playing around with the proof of concept was the idea that, well, let's load up blob storage with a bunch of JSON files. So maybe we have a definition or a JSON definition for each course, and we'd have maybe an index of all the courses that are available. And then from API management, we can expose those JSON files in a friendly API manner that would make it easy for the apps to hook into. And then from an integration perspective, it then becomes a case of how do we populate those files. And that means that while today, what might be a good approach is if I had BizTalk with a scheduled process where, every half hour we go and look for any changes in the data and we just publish any updates. Later on, we might have something where let's pretend, these two line of business systems vanish and we had CRM or we had Salesforce or something like that, had all of our course definitions in. And we may use BizTalk, we may use something else, but the key thing is that that process will end up with the files in blob storage with definitions of the data. So the good thing about blob storage again means we can expose these via the API, but we could also treat it like a content delivery network to a degree as well, where if we had our public website, we could just expose these files and render them in a way that makes all that course information very friendly. So there's a lot of opportunities about having this data held in an easily accessible, highly scalable manner in the cloud that takes away all of the real sort of the problems we would inherit from a legacy line of business application. So that's kind of what I was thinking about. Now, what I'm in my proof of concept, I've already done the on-premise BizTalk piece, and that's not really the bit I wanted to look at today. What I wanted to do was look at how we can take advantage of taking that previous post about static data, how we can take it a little bit further, and let's see if we can actually kind of provide an API that has some slightly more dynamic data. So just dragging in the browser now. So what I've done here is I've got my API management instance, and in my APIs that I've created, I've got one called a course API. And just to show you guys the behind the scenes stuff for this, so if I open up my storage account here, you'll see in my blob container I've got a container with courses in it. So basically I have one file, so if you imagine we've got a unique code per course, and we've got one file per course, and somewhere in here is a file called index which has a list of all the courses in. And if I was to if I was just to open that file, for example, so it should open in Notepad, you can see here's a whole bunch of JSON that was created from the line of business system that tells us all about that course. So pretty cool. That means we've got that data in the cloud, and we just want to make it easily accessible via the API, but to inherit all of the goodness of API management. So in my settings, basically for the API, I've done the same as last time, where I've got my backend URL for that I'm going to proxy is this blob storage container. So my my course data, I've specified my URL suffix as being course API. Now I'm going to create some operations. So I've got two here. I've got get courses, and basically that means that the consumer of the API will just specify a get on the courses resource. Again, I'm going to use the URL rewrite template to pop in my big nasty Sass key into the URL, so that I'm going to convert that to call the index file. So you can see here I've actually got a file called index.json, and that'll basically return the content of that file to give me a list of all the courses that are available. So if we have a quick look at that in the API Management Developer Portal, so we go to my course API, and you can see here I've got I've got all the usual details. I've got a sample response here, so I can have a look at what I'd expect it to look like. And if I try this out, I'll just get rid of the trace header again. So if we try it out, you can see it's going to go away, and then it's going to get back all of that JSON, which is going to basically have me a list of all of the course codes that I've got, and it's got the file name from Blob Storage, but it's really just like a dictionary, but I could make this contain whatever data I wanted. So the thing that I'm going to need to get is the code for each course, the unique code. So we'll have a look at the example of going one step further. So the next thing was, in addition to the get the list of courses, I also want to get an individual course. So here I've got another get operation where on courses I can pass in the unique code for each course, and using the rewrite template I've been able to flow that parameter through so that I can change which of those files inside the blob storage container I'm looking at. So here I can just pass that unique code through. Again, we've got the big SAS key on the end, and this will basically give me an operation that'll get the full details of an individual course. So if we have a quick look at that, and because I copied the code just before there when I try it out, let's see, I can supply a course code, and if we try this out, you'll see I get the full details of an individual course. So I've now basically got an API with two operations. One's get a list of courses, and from the unique code of an individual course, I can then make another call and get the details of a specific course. And all that's doing is it's replacing the file name we're looking up in blob storage to work out which JSON to pull back. So if we go back to my my architecture diagram here, what that means is I've kind of structured the data in blob storage in a way that makes it nice and REST friendly. So I've got an index for a given entity into the container, and then each file contains one specific entity to return, and all I'm doing is using the rewrite template to provide API management with a nice friendly URL for the API consumer. But behind the scenes I'm just flipping it to which actual file I want. So that gives me a really powerful way of having a cloud scale API with all of that data, where I've now created a data format where when I do my transition architecture from my legacy not very nice applications down here to my new whatever the new application is, all I have to do is make sure that I keep getting that data into blob storage in the same JSON structure, and then that API will keep consuming, and it'll be completely decoupled from what application we actually manage the course data in. So I'm kind of thinking that gives me a powerful transition architecture to support that potential model for Acme Uni.